Adam, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sherry. It's great to be here and good to meet you.
You as well. I'm so excited that after years of interacting online, exchanging a few emails, we're finally getting to have an in-depth conversation.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
So, what is the first teen drama you remember watching?
If we count it as a teen drama, The Wonder Years, easily.
Yeah.
That maybe gets retroactively added back in. And then if we're not counting that, it's probably Dawson's Creek, I think, which I came to in college because during middle school and high school, I was a bit of a snob about the teen drama thing. Like everybody was into 90210, and I'm like, I watch Seinfeld, I watch ER, I watch Homicide. I don't watch 90210. Like as I've said in a couple other similar interviews, my mother was watching Buffy before I was. She was watching Dawson's Creek before I was. And just to establish me in the continuum, Dawson's Creek was my senior year of high school. And let me turn
Okay.
off that word here. So like that was the big thing then. And I didn't watch the first season, but when I got my freshman year was the start of season 3 of Buffy and the start of season 2 of Dawson's Creek.
hmm
And that was pretty much where I got into the genre there from that point on. So that's yeah, so a little bit late. I was, 18, 19 when I got into it. And I know most people tend to get in when they're a little bit younger. I know that because when you interact with some of the fans online about these shows, you realize you're screaming at a 15-year-old. It keeps a little perspective there.
It does. Well, what was it about the genre that attracted you and that you continued to be interested in as you watched more shows?
Well, the Starkey answer is Katie Holmes, at least as far as Dawson's Creek.
Sure.
But I think Dawson's Creek was about a teenager who was a huge Spielberg fan and wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was a teenager who was a Spielberg fan who wanted to be a filmmaker.
Oh,
So that identification definitely got me in there. And then, if we count Buffy in there, it's they were subverting so many of the usual tropes. There were things that were kind of unwritten rules knew that a show couldn't do, and then Buffy would go and do it, and like especially to someone who was interested in writing, like, oh, I didn't know we could do that. Like that's something I thought that like if you're doing a show like this, you can't do that. You can't do the example I always point to because it was one of my first encounters was there's an episode of Buffy where Cordelia ends up in an alternate universe. And, we know the rules of these time travel stories. The person who screws up the alternate universe is the one who has to put it back. And halfway through the episode, Cordelia gets killed. And I just remember going, oh my God, they can't do that. She has to fix it. She has to go back to the world. So a lot of stuff on the WB, both genre and not genre, was kind of doing that because it was the attitude of people slightly older than me who'd grown up on this and probably had the thought of like, why can't we do that? And so you find a lot of that in Dawson's Creek. You find a little bit of that in some other teen dramas of the era too. So that I think is what really attracted me was like, oh, these shows aren't what I always thought they were. Or even if the old ones were what I always thought they were, they're trying to do something very different with this incarnation.
mm.
And it's kind of exciting to realize, oh my gosh, there are no rules. There are no rules in this one. So that's pretty much where my interest there must have come from.
Well, besides Buffy, The Wonder Years, and Dawson's Creek, what have been some of your favorite shows in the genre over the years?
Let's see here. Like, I mean, Everwood is one of my all-time favorite shows, and that's more of a
Yeah.
family show, but like the teen
Yeah.
drama aspect of it and the fact it's on the WB, I definitely count that. Roswell has the genre aspect, but you can tell, especially in the Jason Katims written episodes, he really wants to be doing a teen drama about kids who just happen to be aliens, and it's more of a metaphor. When they would branch out into the bigger sci-fi plots, you could tell that's not where their heart was. Gilmore Girls. I remember coming across Gilmore Girls the night it premiered on my channel. My channel would scramble the times because it was primarily a UPN affiliate, and the
Oh,
WB shows kind of got either exiled to 10 p.m. or would air on Saturdays. And I
oh
remember one
wow.
Saturday night, I had left the TV on after I think I must have been watching something on my VCR, and I stopped it, and it was right at the start of whatever was on the WB, and I see these two young women in a coffee shop having a back and forth, and then in the back and forth you realize, oh, they're mother and daughter. Oh, that's kind of funny. So this is like she was a teen mom, and now the daughter has gotten to that age, and I remember just being knowing nothing about the show, knowing I
Mhm.
recognize Lauren Graham from a ton of guest appearances, but like just off the teaser of that, I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and then just getting sucked in off of that. So Gilmore Girls counts. Let me see what else. Friday Night Lights kind of counts. Again, it's another one that's more about different age and different town, but I feel like it fits there because their focus is the teen
Mhm.
characters, even though the adults have developed, which I think is a key thing when you're doing a teen show is you shouldn't have the adults just be these interlopers who are, to be sent off screen to convenience
Mm.
the plot. One thing I loved about Everwood is that the adults had as many stories as the teens did, and that
Right.
their drama would kind of intertwine and play a role in the teen stories rather than just like, oh, we got to give these actors something to do. Let's send them all to the county fair or something like that. So let me see what other ones. The later ones, my wife would be into, like the ones that were kind of on ABC Family or Freeform or whatever
Mm.
that week. She watched Pretty Little Liars, and I would catch her about every third episode of Pretty Little Liars, which to my
Wow.
mind was the way to watch it because like I'm not concerned about continuity. I'm just experiencing it in the moment.
In the
And
moment.
then I know people who, live to put together the puzzle would say, hey, these don't all fit together. But when you're just taking it as it's served, it's actually pretty
Yeah.
entertaining. Switched at Birth was another one of them that I got exposed to through her. And I'm probably leaving a ton out, but yeah, this a fair amount of them over there. 13 Reasons Why. And then
Right.
this technically would not be counted as a teen drama, but I feel like because it premiered on Netflix the same year as 13 Reasons Why and dealt with some of the same stuff, I think American Vandal is a great companion to
Oh.
that series because taken together, they're both a snapshot of what modern high school life looked like then with
Hmm.
social media, with, the cliques, the bullying, and how it had evolved past what I experienced in high school in the 90s. So I always think of those two shows kind of in conversation with each other, mostly because they were on Netflix at about the same time, but they're both dealing with some of those issues that didn't exist at the time of Dawson's Creek or 90210. Oh, I watched
Right.
the new 90210 as well. I'm sure I'm leaving a bunch out. If it was on the CW or the WB, I probably at least sampled it at some point.
Are you following the hype in recent years regarding today's teen dramas like Outer Banks and The Summer I Turned Pretty?
I haven't watched either of those actually. I try to stay up because I was just telling someone last week, whenever a new network or new platform launched, it's inevitable that they would use teen dramas because that's how you get young people. It's also the genre that makes stars. You don't necessarily need stars. You
Mm-hmm.
put someone on a teen drama, they become, an icon. They nobody knew who any of the people on Dawson's Creek were.
Right.
You could say Joshua Jackson and Mighty Ducks, but he wasn't famous for that.
No.
All of those people became stars because of what they were on. And so since then, you can track pretty much any time a new show launches, a new network launches. Pretty Little Liars was one of the first ones out of the gate for Freeform. When UPN launched, they launch both. They always go for shows don't that the audience isn't being fed. So you would have a lot of black shows on UPN and a lot of teen shows because at that point we were in a dearth of teen. Well, I guess the teen shows mostly ended up on the WB, but my point is teen shows are perennial. You might have a rough patch where like the one crop is dying out, but it's always going to come back. And I have been a little lax. I haven't watched The Summer I Turned Pretty, and I haven't watched what was the other one you mentioned?
Outer Banks.
Outer Banks. I've not seen Outer Banks.
Yeah.
No. And what was one? I've checked on some of the college shows, like the
Okay.
college set shows. I cannot remember. This speaks really badly of me. What was the Hulu one? Um,
Tell Me Lies.
yeah, Tell Me Lies. That was it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I watched season one of that. Which
Gotcha.
most of those are functionally, despite the fact they're in college, they're functionally
Right.
shows because every teen show, as I'm sure you have about a season where they treat it as real, and then the second season it's like let's get rid of these adults and treat them like young adults. And first season you have to have them explain to their parents why they're always going off on adventures, and second season they yada yada past it, and they're basically playing it like these characters are the same age as their actors. And so, like, the college set show pretty much does that as
Same.
easily.
Yeah. And you're still a teenager in college, at least in the first
Yeah, and
couple
you
of
can
years.
still make some of the same mistakes. I know the argument is college is yes universal, less universal than high
High
school, and I think
school.
that's right.
Mm.
But when you're not having to fill 22 episodes a season, I think universality becomes less of a concern, and it's just
Right.
all right. What's the roller coaster we're sending them on this week? Dawson's Creek had to be a little bit more universal, and even then, they took plenty of left turns from reality.
Well, tell me about Crisis on Infinite Teen Dramas, what it is for people who don't know, the genesis of it, how you pulled it off.
So this was almost exactly 5 years ago. So we're in the midst of the pandemic. We're in lockdown. I was watching All American, when I didn't mention before. I'd been catching up on that, which I think had 2 seasons on Netflix at that point. And I had noticed that a character in All American had the same name as a character on 13 Reasons Why. And so I
Hmm.
made a joking tweet about, oh, do we need like a Crisis on Infinite Teen Dramas to sort it all out? And at that point, one of my followers on Twitter, who was also an executive over at Berlanti TV, said, "Well, if anyone was going to write it, it would be you." Like by then, I already had a reputation as like the teen drama guy on Twitter, and so I was like, "Huh." And I had nothing else to do at that point. I was working on Superman and Lois at the time, but we had, I think this was a period where we weren't active. We had a couple weeks off, and so I thought, okay, let me just write like what would be the first 4 pages of Crisis on Infinite Teen Dramas, and to give background to people who don't even know where the name comes from.
Yeah.
There was a DC Comics miniseries called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was written to resolve all the various universes where different characters were published, and at the end of it, they were all going to end up on the same Earth. But it's one of the first big comic book crossovers where characters who had never met before in continuity crossed paths and met to save their world. So I was like, okay, well, Crisis on Infinite Teen Drama. They have all these teen drama world, and so I wrote 4 pages that just kind of introduced it and sort of also as a little riff on Crisis on Infinite Earths, and just put it out there on Twitter, like, oh, hey, I made this joke. Here's probably what it would look like, and it got a good response. And so then the next day, I was like, well, let me try another 4 pages playing with some different characters, and that got a response. And I think it was after the third batch of pages I posted on a lark. Like at that point, I'm still not thinking, I do not want to write the script. It's ridiculous. It's a gimmick script. I don't know how to get out of it. It's an idea that sounds like a fun idea, but where is the story? And I think it was after the third batch of pages, which was set in the Gilmore Girls world, where Ben Blacker, who hosts a screenwriting podcast, or rather a TV writing podcast called The Writers Panel, and who at that point was doing some Zoom live reads of stuff, reached out and said, if you finish the script, I would love to like figure out how to do a live read of it. And I was like, oh shoot, now I got to finish the script. Because like if I have just 12 pages and he's saying, let's do this, who am I to say no? So after I had posted something like 16 pages of it, I realized, all right, I've got to figure out what the actual story is here. Because at that point I was just making it up as I went. And so I took about a week and wrote the rest of the script, and then eventually posted it online and said, hey, we joked about it, and I actually gave it some thought, and here's what it is. And at that point, Ben read it and said, let's do it. And so what I did after Ben and I had a talk was I sent it to Greg Berlanti, who I was working for at the time, as I mentioned, on Superman and Lois. It wasn't like a total cold email.
Yeah.
Who I was. We'd met several times, all of that. And I said, hey, so this thing looks like it might actually become a real live read. And I'm playing with some of your babies here because Everwood was the first show Greg created. And I know that is a show that is very near and dear to him. And Ephraim and Amy from Everwood are critical to the storyline in Crisis on Infinite Teen Dramas, and a couple other connections to Greg too. So I said, because you're probably going to hear about this, I did want you to know I'm not doing this behind your back. And I
Yeah.
sent it to him, and about a week later, he shot me an email back saying, "This is really funny. Let me know. Let me know if I can help in any way with the live read." And I was like, "Well, if you're going to invite the vampire in on that one, could you maybe make some calls to some people from Everwood and other places and see if they would play their characters?" And what eventually was decided was, at that point, Greg Smith, who played Ephraim on Everwood, was our producing director on Superman and Lois. And he was like, okay, let's you and me and Ben get on a call with Greg Smith, and we'll see if he's interested. And if Greg is in, we can talk about going to Emily Van Camp, and
Right.
then we'll see about some of the other people. And so that was essentially what we did. And it was a little surreal because the first call, of course, Greg Berlanti is the last one to show up, and Ben and I are there, and Greg Smith comes, and we're talking about it, and he says, hey, man, I haven't read like Ephraim dialogue in like 14 years at this point, but I feel like you really nailed it. I'm like, okay, he could
That's
say
a
no to
compliment.
this. And I am like, Great. Hey, no, anointed by Ephraim right there. And Ben ended up putting together a great cast for the actors who we didn't get to reprise their roles. We ended up having three people reprise their roles. It was Emily and Greg, and we had Autumn Reeser reprise her
Yeah.
role from the OC. And it was, you know, a crazy thing because we told the actors you could decide if you wanted to do an imitation of the original actor or if you wanted to go your own way. We didn't want to cast someone and say, you have to play it like, Kristen Bell or Lauren Graham. Just do what feels right. And we had Melissa Fumero from Brooklyn Nine-Nine
Mhm.
playing Lorelai Gilmore, and it was like uncanny. She nailed every bit of it. And then she also had to play Joey Potter from Dawson's Creek, and you saw her transform, and she was doing the mannerisms. She did the hair tuck, she did the lip bite, and so
Yeah.
that was just a surreal day of when we recorded it, because with one exception, we recorded everybody together on one large Zoom, so
Wow.
everybody could play off of each other. And it was a thing where, like, I'm watching like 16 panels filled with some actors reprising roles and some actors who I know, from other things playing weird roles.
And they're reading
And
your words.
reading my words. It's one of those things where, like, you forget they're reading your words, like, and like, oh, you get kind of caught up, like, oh, this is good, it's good. And then, Greg and Emily are playing Ephraim and Amy, and it sounds, especially coming out of their mouths, it sounds like something from the show. And I get caught up, like, oh, this is a nice scene. And I go, wait, I wrote this scene. It's that surreal moment of, oh my God, like, this feels like the thing, and it's happening in front of me. Um, and so it's also like a very complicated script. I don't want to summarize it too much because you get lost in the weeds really easily. But the idea is something is destroying all these universes. The adult Kevin Arnold, that is the Kevin Arnold narrator we've heard from the
Right.
Wonder Years, done by Daniel Stern, has begun to gather all of these icons who represent different things in teen universes. And so it necessitates a lot of team ups and people working together. And so, like, Mark Gagliardi, who did Kevin Arnold, he nailed the Daniel Stern cadence and voice. And he's the first thing you hear in that. And so I remember there was a little bit of suspense on my part, like, oh, is he going to go for it? Is he going to play it straight? Is he going to play it like the character? And you kind of saw everybody on the Zoom when he comes out doing a dead on
Daniel
Daniel
Stern.
Stern, everybody kind of perked up, like, oh, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And the first time we recorded it was a brilliant performance from everyone. And there's a moment where we stopped about 2/3 of the way through because there was a complicated bit. And Ben was like, okay, let's stop here and let's take 5 minutes and we'll reset and we'll do this piece on its own and then we'll go. And one of the actors said, I finally understand this script, because it's a lot of confusing universe hopping. But when you see it, it all makes sense. And when
Yeah.
you see that, like, okay, we have Hannah from 13 Reasons Why is going with Amy Abbott from Everwood to the Pretty Little Liars thing. And there's a bunch of little in jokes about both of their shows and all of their other stuff. It all plays so much more when you hear people actually bringing it to life. And it was a lot of fun to do. And then Ben emails me an hour after we're done and he says, we screwed up the recording, we're going to have to do it again. And I'm like, oh my God, we got all these people to give us 2 hours of their time as a favor and we have to do it a second time. And so Ben emails and, mea culpa, said, look, we'll figure it out. I think we'll do it again 3 weeks from now. And I was nervous as hell because I'm like,
Yeah.
that was magic right there. How can you recapture that? And damned if everybody didn't get even better
Yeah.
the second time, because I think some people saw what other people did with it, like the actors who, like, just went completely off book with their performances. Like my friend Nick Wexler played Lucas
Hmm.
Scott, and I talked to him later, like he didn't study Chad Michael Murray. He didn't. He said, I met him, a couple things, but he said he just played it completely bonkers off the wall. And that worked because you have half the people like doing it dead on serious, and the other half of the people are just going with their wild interpretation. And I think it emboldened some people, like, oh, I got to step my game up either in one direction or the other. And the second time was an even more amazing performance out of them. So it was just a very surreal, 2 afternoons, as it turned out, just watching my words being said by very famous people and seeing them all enjoy themselves. And to see the reaction it got when it went out into the world was something very special too,
Yeah,
especially.
because you packaged it as a live stream event. I bought a ticket, and not only did it appeal to the teen drama horror in me for obvious reasons, but there was also a charitable component behind it. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I wanted to do something, and the names escape me. It's been 5 years, but there was a fund for the Hollywood assistants and a lot of the people who had been, out of work due to the pandemic or were paying their bills. So I did that, and then Ben, I should look it up because I can't remember his. He was very big on the charity he always does is something that allows, I believe, African American families to build generational wealth.
Mm.
And so that was what his component was. So it was split 50-50 between the two because
With the
I think
proceeds.
for the proceeds, yeah. And I
Yes.
think that was key to getting people on board because there were two caveats we promised them. We said any money made is going to charity. Nobody is like profiting off of
Hmm.
this. And it's going to live on, our that platform for 10 days. And that's it. It's not something we're uploading in perpetuity to YouTube. You're doing
Right.
us a favor. It's going to exist for a finite time. Because, certainly when you do like live reads out here in LA, people will participate sometimes because it's like, okay, so performance is just going to live in this theater. You're not
Right.
recording
One
it. You're not
time.
putting it out there. And so, I mean, that is the one thing that's a shame is that means it doesn't live out there in the world, whereas we're talking about it, people can find it.
Yeah.
But I think that was important as far as getting some people to participate who wouldn't have participated otherwise. If it was like, hey, we're doing a fun YouTube thing and people are going to get it forever, I can understand an actor being nervous about that and being lured in more like, oh, we're making it an event and it's only going to be for this long and it's just to raise money for this. And so uh, that was an aspect of it that I feel bad because every now and then I'll get an email from someone saying, "Hey, I just learned about this. Can I find it?" I'm like, "I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we can't get it
Well,
out there."
people can still read the script on your
Mhm.
website. And my favorite thing, I think, is the annotations that you have that explain every reference, every Easter egg. And you incorporated a good bit from three shows that I routinely write about, Dawson's Creek, The OC, and One Tree Hill. At one point, there's even a Beverly Hills 90210 reference. So it's just like catnip for me.
That there were a couple I had to cheat on because I hadn't seen the shows. The 90210 one was like, okay, I knew stuff was in the culture, and
Yeah.
they go in the script. They go to the Donna Martin
When it
graduates
graduates. Yeah.
protest, which was big enough that I knew about it, despite having maybe seen one episode of 90210.
Yeah.
And that was there also to facilitate. There's a moment where it's Archie and Veronica from Riverdale who go there, and they bump into Dylan McKay,
Yep.
and Archie kind of has a double take, like, Dad? And when I wrote that was a joke, but that was what led to a big plot point in there, which is that there's some people who exist across different universes or have doppelgangers across the universes, and that becomes a bit of a plot point of like, oh, someone has a duplicate that exists in this universe, and we need to get this person. And yeah, One Tree Hill. I think when I broke it out, like I figured out there were like four or five that were going to be kind of crucial to the story, where those characters were like the spine of it, and then it became a game of like how many more can I cram in along the way? Like I knew the One Tree Hill character was going to be crucial. I knew Everwood was going to be crucial. I knew Wonder Years and Dawson were going to be. And then it became the challenge of like, okay, if I have, these characters here, who else can Dawson Leary go to meet? The
Hmm.
OC was the first universe to die in the script, in part
Yeah.
because that is a direct tribute to the opening of Crisis on Infinite Earths, where we see one of the major Earths just get completely destroyed in the first 5 pages. So I'm like, it's got to be someone big. And at that point, I hadn't seen much of the OC. So I'm like, okay, I can riff on the big pop culture stuff and then I can get them out of the way because I wouldn't know how to use those people. And then ironically, in the time between when I wrote it and when we did the live read, I had binged all of the OC on Max. And I'm like, oh, I could have used some of these people elsewhere. But yeah, there were also a couple I could never figure out where to put. I wanted to put a Felicity, thing in somewhere. I think I tried a couple times with my so-called life, and yeah, at a certain point, I had 13 shows in there or so, maybe 14, and it was like, all right, it's got to tell the story somehow, and play with the chess pieces I have. But I don't think I did Beverly Hills 90210, but I don't think I used 90210 the sequel series. Did I?
No, I don't think you did either.
See, that one I watched. That one I could have, but I think at that point I was burgeoning with characters, and I'm like, I mean, Adriana's function is pretty much filled by what Brooke Davis would be doing, and I'd rather play with Brooke than Adriana.
Yeah,
That kind of thing.
that's fair. I like to ignore that 90210 as well. Well, let's talk about your nickname, the Bitter Script Reader. How did that come about?
I had been doing script reading for a while. Like my first job in Hollywood was as an office PA assistant, and that entailed a lot of script reading, which led to being a development assistant, which meant a lot of script reading. And so,
But what is
pretty much
script
from the
reading for those that
script
don't
reading,
know?
okay, it's every production company, agency, anything like that, studio gets more scripts than anyone in a position of power can have time to read. And
Right.
so my job is to read all of the scripts and do 1 to 2 pages of what we call coverage, which is a summary and then basically a review of the script. And most of the time, the scripts aren't that good, but it's, you know, the way that coverage ends up serving its purpose is that the person I'm working for, whether it's an executive, agent, manager, can then get on the phone with the person who submitted it and said, "Hey, no, read it. It's really interesting. It's not for me." And they can like look at the comments and go, "Yeah, you know, we've had some thoughts about blah, 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 blah." And they can sound like they read it intelligently. And also for some of the more hands-on development executives, they can read it and go, "Oh, okay, I'm looking for a movie like this. Comments are it's not quite there, but like from reading the synopsis, there's some interesting ideas. This almost never happens. Most of the time, if I pass it, it dies right there and they pass on it. But
Mm.
it exists also so that 5 years later, if someone makes the movie, you can go back into the archives and find out who told you not to make this movie and it ended up over there. You know what?
They
You
blame the
passed on
script reader.
seven. How did you pass on seven? Every now and then, there are like famous coverage reports from movies that were successful that make their way on there. And I do remember seeing one for seven, and I
Yeah.
understand why a studio reader would pass on seven. You know, if it's just a script, you're like, I think it was written. The coverage was 3 years before it came out, so like 1994, that
Mm.
kind of violent crime drama thriller wasn't big, and it's a very
Right.
bold, big swing script. So you can understand how sometimes, like, I don't know, and sometimes stuff like that gets passed on just because it's the wrong fit for the people. You know, it's
Mm.
if you send a script like that to a company that makes rom-coms, it's probably going to get a pass because it's just like, oh, it's a good read, but what can we do with it? So I had been doing that for about 5 or 6 years, and I had noticed that on the internet, and if you ever went to the screenwriting section of the bookstore, the knowledge of what a script reader does was becoming more well known. It was kind of finding its way in the culture, and there are always discussion boards and sites where aspiring writers would complain about, oh, I have to get past the script reader. Oh, he gave me terrible coverage. They all hate everything. They're a bunch of bitter script readers, And so when I started the blog, I thought it was originally one of the ambitions was I was going to tell stories about what it was like to be a reader and what you could learn as a writer from the perspective of a reader. And I did not want to use my real name because then, and probably now still, if you're blogging about your job and putting your name on it, you're probably jeopardizing some future employment because people are paranoid. And they're like, well, if I hire him, is he going to talk about what it's like in this office? So I needed a moniker, and like knowing that, people always said that these were bitter script readers. I'm like, oh, that's it. And it'll be kind of an ironic name because I'm the bitter script reader, but I'm actually giving advice. And there were a couple other stories, like just from my time as a reader, I thought would be interesting. And then one of the end games of that was, if I get enough of this, I can get a following, and maybe someone will want me to write a screenwriting book, or maybe it'll be a way in with writer connections. It'll be some way to network. And at a certain point, up to a certain point, I was taking my blog posts every week and like organizing them into what would be the how-to screenwriting book based on those blog
Mm.
posts. That one never got written. But there are a couple of books out there about getting past the studio reader, what script readers think. Like it was the right time for that, probably. And what I found out about a year after the blog launched was that I'd also launched on Twitter, mostly just to promote the blog. And as I started following more and more writers, they would start following me. And I wrote something about a movie that had come out, and I got an email from the writer of the movie. And that started a back and forth. And he was like, yeah, a bunch of us, we were having lunch recently. We were talking about your blog. And I'm like,
What?
you got what? You guys are pros. You're talking about me? Like I thought my audience was people who were trying to be you. I didn't think my audience was you. And that, started. That was the beginning of me discovering that okay, the blog might have information for amateurs, but pros are enjoying reading it. And then the more I offered my perspective on Twitter, the more I got retweeted. And I think on Twitter, it's easier, at least at the time, it was easier to discover voices that you found interesting
Yeah.
and you didn't have to read a giant blog post every day. It's just kind of, hey, this guy has some funny observations on that movie that just came out, or the TV show, or he's just interesting in general. And that got me a lot of connections
Mm.
that over the years grew and grew, and ultimately led to my connection with Greg Berlanti, which was what got me on the show. But every job I've had in TV ultimately sprang from a Twitter connection, and so that was that avenue I don't think works anymore. I was just telling some people who were coming out
Not
here,
today's Twitter.
not today, Twitter, not today's Twitter. No, you got
No.
to find your own. I said, this is how I broke in. This is how I networked. I said, that doesn't work anymore. It's not going to work for you. So you've got to find out whatever the 2025 version of Twitter is. Like maybe not literally Twitter, but you've got to find your own way of putting yourself in front of people that they are interacting and that they're meeting you. Because it was, I was anonymous on there for like over 10 years. And
Wow.
it would be fun where I would go to Comic-Con and I would see someone who I had interacted with, many, many times on Twitter. I had like a Twitter relationship with them, and I'd kind of sneak up on them. I go, oh, hey, we actually know each other on Twitter. And they would be like, oh, who
Who
are
are
you? What's your name?
you?
I said, I'm Better Script Reader. And I'd always be like, oh, nice to meet you. To be like, suddenly we're old friends because there was this interaction that lived there. And I have a couple friends who always loved watching me pull that maneuver, whether it was at Comic-Con or at a blacklist party or at a screening somewhere, because it never failed to get that reaction when I honed it on a target that I'd had a really good interaction with online.
Well, you were a writer's assistant on Blood and Treasure and on Superman and Lois, and then you became a staff writer on Superman and Lois. So, what was that like?
Dream come true. The first season on Superman and Lois, they were good enough. Not every show is like this, but the assistants were allowed to be in the room, and because I'm the writer's assistant, I'm in there anyway. But like we were allowed to speak as much as anybody was. There was no like,
Wow.
okay, you don't speak, or you guys only speak on Fridays, or if you have an idea, raise your hand and maybe we'll call on you. Like we were essentially treated like staff writers, and in that first season, I had thrown in two relatively big ideas that became in major parts of the story arc. And I'm been a Superman fan pretty much since I could read. So, and I had watched all of the other Arrowverse shows. So that was another way I became valuable in that room, was I was the guy who could say, hey, in Superman lore, this exists. And you might think this is hard canon because it was in the Christopher Reeve movies, but that exists nowhere else. So don't feel like we have to be bound to it. Or, if something was coming up and I raise my hand and say, guys, hang on. We do have to be aware that, like, well, I know we don't want to go down this road too much. Like Supergirl has done something like this, and so if we're doing this, we should find a way to make it different. Or, all right, I'm not saying we have to name check all of the continuity, but if we're doing something that seems to contradict Supergirl, we should know at least for ourselves how that's not a contradiction. We don't have to stop and have the characters literally say, well, there's Supergirl dealt with blah blah blah, because there's nothing more fascinating to an audience when the characters on the show they're
Doing
watching are talking about
exposition.
characters on another show. Now,
Yeah.
I know there's a very small portion of the audience that loves when the other shows reference each other,
Mm,
but I guarantee you that's not a giant portion of the audience. And it's alienating to a new audience if you're talking about stuff that in a way that it feels like they should know it. Like sometimes you're going to have to reference past continuity, but I always say, like, if you go to the first season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and they're trying to tie it to the Star Trek universe by bringing in all these cameos and characters
hmm.
from the next generation, those episodes tend to be the weakest ones because the show is no longer Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It is, look at these guest stars who you're not going to see again
Right.
and who have no organic role on the show. It's a show should be about its characters and about the incidents, but it's an unavoidable in the Arrowverse that, yeah, if you're telling a story, you do need someone there to say, hey, just last year on Legends, they did this kind of story, so we should tell it differently, or such and such stuff like that. So I had a number of ways I was valuable to the showrunner in that first season, and he gave me an episode to write, which we then had to, after I turned it in, because we did a massive rewrite on much of the season, we had to go back and basically create an entirely new episode out of my episode. And so I got to be a part of that, because one advantage of being the assistant that season is I wasn't under a contract of so many weeks. The staff writers, the real staff writers that season were. And so at Christmas, they had a hard out. They had to go, goodbye. And right in January of that year was where all of the rewrites were starting on episodes. And because I didn't have to go away. I got to be at least in the room on that stuff and
Right.
ultimately I might contribute to it. So I got to log more time that season than I would have as a staff writer, which was pretty cool. And sort of functioning as sort of a de facto staff writer. So at the end of the season, I got a call from the showrunner, Todd Helbing, and he said, just want you to know we're putting you on staff next season. I was like, it's fantastic. I don't have to take notes. I am a real writer. Like by that point, I'd done my episode. I had my writer's card, writer's guild card.
Hmm.
But to be on staff was really special. It was kind of an acknowledgement of like, yes, you belong here. This thing you've been working for so long, it's that. And you know, it was a great time after that.
Well, things have changed rapidly, not just at the CW, but in the industry at large. So, what do you think is the biggest misconception about being a TV writer today?
Oh man. I think one thing I see in fandoms is a lot of fandoms get mad at shows and they say, why don't they just do what the fans want? And they seem to believe in this division of writers and fans. And
Mm.
while I acknowledge in rare cases you might have a writer who ends up on a show that they're not a fan of just because they're under contract and the network says you're going here, most of the time you will find no bigger, more rabid fans of a show than the writing staff.
Hmm.
And I always kind of bristle when there's, well, what the real fans want. No, they're not what the real fans want because the fans, you're talking about either what the online fans want, which are not a totality of what the entire viewership of the show wants. But more often when people use it, they're not even talking about what the fans want. It's what I want. This is what I want, and I'm a real fan, and therefore the show should bend to me and to me only. And everything not in that direction is clearly someone who doesn't love the show the right way.
And doesn't know what they're
And so,
doing. And
yeah, and so the biggest misconception is that the writers don't care about the characters, that when bad things happen to a character, it means the writer hates the characters. Usually it's the opposite, because when bad things are happening to a character, that means drama and screen time. So if a
yeah.
character is getting a lot of drama and screen time, it's not, I hate this actor and I'm going to punish them by making them come in every day and do this and cry. It usually means this actor is great. And when this actor cries, we all cry. So we know this actor is our quarterback. We're going to hand them the ball and they're going to run it in. You know, if a character is undergoing a lot of stuff, you know, whether it's like season 6 of Buffy, my God, Buffy's being beaten up. It's proof that Joss Whedon hates Sarah Michelle Gellar. No, if Joss Whedon hated Sarah Michelle Gellar that much, he would put her in a coma and leave her in a coma the entire season. He would not say, Sarah, here is a bunch of stuff for your actor's reel where you are going to be challenged and do things that an actor would salivate over. Like you can get, certainly there are times where creators and actors have different perspectives on their characters, but the idea, if the actors hate it, if I'm sorry, if the writers hate a character, it's the character you see the least because they are trying not to use them as much as possible. It is that,
Yeah.
oh shit, that guy, I got to
What
do
do I
that.
do
All
with
right, fine, I'm going
them?
to write him
Yeah.
in here. So that if you're talking about the biggest misconception among writers, there's always this war between writers and fans, and you know, oh, this is terrible. Like you have to look at it as there needs to be drama, there needs to be conflict for these stories to be interesting. Stories where people are happy, you might feel good watching, but you're also not going to be compelled to watch it every week if there's nothing challenging them. And I struggle with it from both sides because, like, I
Because you
love
are
season
a
3 of
fan.
Dawson's Creek. I am a fan, and I love seeing the drama happen. And with some shows, I remember like love season 3 of Dawson's Creek. Joey
Hmm.
and Pacey get together, all the angst there,
Yes.
all of that. You know,
Yes.
people say, "Oh, why did they do it this way?" Because now Dawson, I'm like, that fight is great. It's awesome when you have Joey and Pacey and Dawson in that triangle, and Dawson is a complete asshole, and James
Totally.
Vanderbeek leans into it. Like, okay, if you're gonna make this character unlikable, I am going to go full tilt villain. You're gonna have to go overboard next season, writing out of this corner. Like, I love that. But I also empathize, you know, when you get to season 4 and you've had the peak of Joey Pacey, they've been in love, they've been on the boat for 3 months, and they get back, and like 22 episodes of people just lovey-dovey isn't usually interesting. And
You need the
so very quickly
conflict.
you get conflict injected into the episodes. And I'm sure some of this was a network mandate too, because you would have a fight in the episode and then they would make up at 8:55 every week, and then
Yep.
there'd be another fight, and that gets a little repetitive. And I get it as a fan. Like there's a part of me that's like, I understand the necessity of this. I even understand that as teenagers, some of this these fights are inevitable and real. And it
Hmm.
wouldn't be realistic if they dealt with all of their problems maturely. But I also get like, oh, could we give it a rest for a couple of weeks and do that? So I, as a fan, I understand, but I also know that like when shows have put people in a place where everybody seems to have gotten what they wanted, very quickly you lose interest in the show, because the thing that keeps you coming back is, how are they going to solve this? How are they going to fix this? How are they going to get to the ending that I want? If you reach your penultimate moment too early, then the audience goes, oh, well, I'm here. I've seen everything I need to see, and not that you can't go overboard in the other way. Again, I use Buffy a lot because that's a good universal example. But like season 6 of Buffy, the writer part of me and even the viewer part of me is like, that's a fascinating idea. Buffy is dead. She comes back and she's not happy because she was in heaven. And so once you've been in heaven, being back here sucks. That's an interesting idea for a story.
Yeah.
The fact she's keeping for friends, totally get it. Where that story kind of starts jumping the rails for me is where it like wallows in misery and darkness so much. Like you need that low point, but as a viewer experiencing it, Buffy first sleeps with Spike at the end of November, and that storyline is not brought to a climax until the end of April. Which, yeah, when you watch on DVD, as my wife did, it's something like 7 episodes, and you
Right.
burn
It's
through it,
rapid.
and you're not living in it. But when you're watching it week to week, and every week you're turning on Buffy, and you're like, oh, I'm watching this to get kicked in the balls with how much Buffy thinks her life sucks, and how low she's sunk, and how miserable she is, and Spike telling her how terrible she has gotten, that how much she has lowered herself. Like, I can enjoy that for a week or two as compelling drama,
Hmm.
and I enjoy it for 7 months as compelling. Or I guess it wasn't 7. I guess it was 5 months. Am I in for five
Yeah.
months of her being kicked in the balls the same time everyone else is being kicked in the balls? Because that's, if you've seen season 6 of Buffy, everybody hits a low point at the same time. And then there, I'm like, yeah, that's where I wish someone had an up moment, and maybe you can play with the guilt of like Xander Nani being like, our life is going great, and it's just I feel bad because everybody else's sucks. And the decision the show made was like, well, everybody else's life sucks, and what if we ruin this relationship that so far hasn't had many cracks in it, and we just destroy it in a terrible way? Let's have Xander do one of the worst things he could do to Anya right there and regress all of his character growth. And as a fan, I get it, and as a writer, I also get how they arrived there. um, Sometimes these things happen when you don't realize how certain storylines are playing across each other. So I
Yeah.
try to be charitable just because I remember what it was like seeing a pack of insane fans, demonize a writer just because their name was on an episode they didn't like.
Yeah.
The Star Trek fans are the same brand of crazy as teen drama fans. Every fandom has its own brand of crazy,
Yeah.
and they all kind of overlap. So like when I grew up in Star Trek fandom, it prepared me very well for teen drama fandom. It's the same kinds of fights. They're just wearing different skins.
Now, I've met Greg Berlanti once and we correspond via email from time to time, but you've actually gotten to work with him and for him. So I have to ask what that has been like.
It's amazing. The one disappointment was we started on Superman and Lois about a month before the pandemic, and
Hmm.
at that point, what we understood was the way Greg is in the room for the first season of all of his shows. Like Todd Helbing was our day-to-day showrunner. Greg was like, our big guy showrunner. And what we were told was he was going to be coming in regularly, and we were going to be breaking story with him. And so for a guy who like season 3 of Dawson's Creek was like the thing that really turned him into a
Yeah,
TV writer, that was exciting. And Jeffrey Stepakoff has written a wonderful
I
book
know.
about what that
You
season
have.
was like,
Yes.
Billion Dollar Kiss, that if any of you guys haven't read it, you really
Excellent.
need to
Yes,
read.
I've written
It's
about it.
one
Yeah.
of my favorite reads about working in TV. So I was amped. And then a month in, pandemic happens, and we're on Zoom. And so the first time Greg comes in to work with us on Zoom, you can tell it's overwhelming because you have like 12 of us there and we're all taking turns and it's this and that. And so after that, Greg was like, I think the way this has got to work is that, you guys, all, pitch to Todd. Todd distills it down to what he wants me to do. And then Todd
Hmm.
and I will have our conversations about it and we'll build the show that way, which 100% makes sense. I think from hearing the experience of other people who are working on Zoom and writers' rooms, I think we handled it probably among the best. We found a rhythm. Other people wanted to shoot themselves in the face every time they went in there. But our staff worked pretty well on there. But it was a shame that like I didn't get to work with Greg in the way I wanted to,
Yeah.
or had hoped. but I'd certainly met him a couple of times before that, and then have seen him since. And yeah, as I said, he definitely called in some favors for the live read, and we've traded emails and had a couple one-on-ones. And so like the one thing I haven't fulfilled, I guess, is to actually be in the writer's room
In
long
the
term with
room.
Greg.
Yeah.
We had one or two early meetings with him on Superman, where like we were talking like broad strokes blue sky stuff, and he gave us a homework assignment, which was everybody had to go write two scenes featuring two characters each. And it could be about anything. It just had to be a 3-page scene with two characters from the show. You could do expected pairings, you could do wacky pairings. You could do Superman and Lois, or you could do Superman and Lana's daughter. Whatever. The gamut was
Yeah.
there. He said, and then he said, you're all going to do this, and then you're going to send your pages to Adam, and Adam is going to put them in a packet and send them out with all your names off of there, and we're going to read it, and that's the voice of the show. And you can also have the fun of like trying to guess, who
Who did
wrote
it?
what
Yeah.
stuff. And that was a really cool assignment. And I thought, I'm stealing that from when I'm a showrunner. I told this to some other higher level writers, and they were like, oh, I wouldn't do it. That's free work right there. I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, you're ridiculous. Like, you're going to tell me to write 6 pages, 2 scenes that they're not going to use? That's crazy. And I'm like, no, this was fun.
That
And
exercise.
it was neat seeing how everybody chose some pairings, and what they had the characters saying and doing. And I think like that planted some nuggets for a couple of later developments with the characters in the show. But that was a neat assignment where I'm like, oh, this is a good thing, because it's forcing us to think about the characters, not rigidly in how it fits into that episode's plot. It's like, if you just are a fly on the wall for these two people talking for 3 minutes, like,
Yeah.
and
What would they
you could
say?
claim that it was like part of a larger episode. Like if you wanted Superman and his son to come in hot, like, oh my God, Lex Luthor has done XYZ. How are we going to do it? And fight about how to proceed. You could do that. It didn't have to like be in a total vacuum. But even making that choice, tells you something about, what you want to write or that. So that was a cool assignment. And that was, one bit of unique wisdom I took from Greg. And I just wish we'd had, more of it through the season. But he's very smart, very passionate about TV. He's very decisive. Someone pitched him an idea that he, other writers would have been like, oh, there's something good there on the face, or oh, this, and he assessed it immediately, and he was like, it's a really good idea. I see why you're coming at it from this angle, because you want to do something different. But
Mhm.
here's my concern with, if we do this, we're changing something so foundational that ultimately, if you look at it, this show wouldn't be what the show is. And I was like, thought about it, I'm like, holy shit, yeah, he's right. I see his point, because and I don't want to get into the pitch because it wasn't used and it was someone else's idea.
Yeah.
But he was very fast in looking at it from all angles, and also just, understanding that when he turned it down, he wanted the writer to understood they were heard. And I'm not just going to say, no, I don't like it, or no, it doesn't feel right. Here's why. Here's my thinking.
Mhm.
Which I find, having been in several writers' rooms, if a showrunner can articulate not just, no, I don't want to do that, but like why something in their brain is saying they don't want to do it, it's helpful, because the patterns start to reveal themselves, and you start looking at the show the way the showrunner looks at it, and you're able to craft what you're doing to that vision a lot better. The worst is if it's just like, no, 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 I'll know it when I see it. No, yes, no, yes. Like, if you don't know what is driving the no or the yes, you can't figure out what the target is. But when you're told, no, I don't want to do this because this results in, we're going to have to carry this ball forward with this character. And then if we go that far, that's going to just be the only thing we can do with them all season,
Right.
if we're putting them through this thing. And I'm just making up an example here. So like, I like it. It's a great idea, but I don't think it's something we want to be carrying, a season or two from now, because it's just that big of an idea. And oh, okay. And a smart showrunner is thinking, down the road on that, or at the very least is like, I know if we do this way, we're causing problems for ourselves. So you have to have kind of like a big galaxy brain and also a small brain, because
Yeah.
sometimes you'll pitch an idea that is great in the macro, and then you'll say, that is good, I would love to do that.
Small
Problem is, in the
picture.
micro where this thing exists right here, we're causing some problems.
Yeah.
And anybody who's read about that 3rd season of Dawson's Creek knows that by the time Greg took over, that ship had run aground, and the guy who was
Yep.
running the show before him had made some really weak or stupid choices with the characters that, to varying degrees, they're like, okay, we're going to live with it, or are we just going to acknowledge that it was out of character? And it's just go watch the third season premiere,
I
and
mean,
nobody's
watch
acting like themselves.
Dawson and Eve and all of
Dawson and Eve, the implied encounter on the boat when Dawson crashes,
yeah.
sort of like they agreed, like, oh, okay, we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. Eve is Jen's sister. We don't really get any resolution on that.
No.
What Joey, I remember watching the season 3 premiere, and that Joey had gone from this strong character who is reduced to like stripping down in Dawson's bedroom and basically begging
Throwing
him,
herself. Yeah.
yeah, throwing herself at him, and just thinking like, wow, you really don't know Joey at all. And then like, okay, when Greg and Gina Fattore and everybody else who was in the
Yeah.
room at that time finally gets to pick up the ball and run with it, you kind of make a decision like, how much of this do we want to acknowledge and how much of this do we want to go forward with? And it's crazy that for everything that season did wrong in the first few episodes, in the first episode, there is the built-in reason to put Joey and Pacey
The
together.
seed.
Like that's the one thing where it's like, and at Dawson's suggestion, which becomes a major point.
Yeah.
So everything else there you kind of ignore, but you recognize like, okay, he's checking in on her. And even if the rationale for that doesn't exist, we can kind of keep that alive long enough to like get them
Build
to
on
a
it.
real relationship, real
Hmm.
friendship that will then platform elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I once said on
Thank God
Twitter,
they did.
yeah, and that was just, they could have thrown the entire 7 episodes out with the bathwater there
Yeah.
and just said, we're starting fresh. We're going to reset these guys to the people you like. And at the time in 1999, we all would have said, thank God this feels like the show. That's a gas leak season. We're going with it. But they recognize that, like, in all of these bad decisions here, it's interesting that Joey and Pacey are put together. And it's interesting that Dawson, even though he couldn't be with Joey, he was still concerned about Joey enough, maybe possessive enough to say, hey, look after her. It's a little patronizing, but it's also a
Yeah.
teenage boy thing. Like, that's something there. And so let's play with that. What does that get us? Well, that gets us, Joey saying, I need to learn to dance for the scholarship. And so if you want to hang out, you're going to have to do me this favor. And I remember saying once on Twitter that episode where Joey is taking dance lessons with Pacey, and then Dawson finds out and gets the crazy idea that they're a couple, and then Jen finds out and it becomes a foursome. I
Jealous.
remember
Yep.
saying that Four to Tango was just one of the best episodes of the show.
Yeah.
And Gina Fattore, who's credited on that episode, said, the episode that took us 40 minutes to write is one of our 10 best? Oh, please. They're like, what are you talking about? But
It's
yeah,
wonderful too.
to know that so many of those things were kind of done on the fly, but they recognized what the gem was right there, the thing that ended up driving the whole season. We have these two characters who are opposites, and we're going to force them to interact. And then we're also going to have Dawson's reaction to those guys, like what's going on here. He's maybe even kind of the audience there. And then when we see how jealous he is, oh, that's something we can carry. That's an
Yeah.
arc. And I think by that point, Greg had already decided like the thing that was going to shake everything up was Joey kisses Pacey. And so I don't know exactly where it falls in the planning of that episode and the execution of
Hmm.
that episode, but he had a signpost and he realized what was going to get you there. Like, again, thinking about the macro and the micro.
Yeah.
And Greg has great story brain. I've heard so many stories from other people on Arrowverse shows where he comes in and, they have, one plan or another. And he says, no, what if we did this? What if we throw all of that out and we do this?
Mm.
There's an infamous story where on one show the staff was going to do one thing and he came in with a completely different plan that would have wrapped up that idea much sooner. And
Hmm.
they're like, well, we were planning this for long term. And he's like, well, just find more story. And I think that's instructive. Like Greg's instinct was, this could be a long-term story, or it could be a much shorter term story. And if you're making a short-term story, you'll find more story.
Yep.
And
There's always more story to tell.
yeah, no, his story brain is extremely strong. I mean, that's evident from a lot of his work. But like, he's very smart when he would comment on certain ideas or certain characters or things that he would say, I think it should be this. It's yeah. I wish I could give some specific examples, but there's a certain amount of this that I can't get into. And also, I don't imagine most of your viewers have seen most of Superman and Lois, so I really would be in the weeds there. But I'd say Jeffrey Stepakoff's book is a
Yeah.
good bird's eye view of like kind of how that process is. Even though that's Greg's first show as a showrunner, he's a lot of those skills and a lot of that forethought is there.
Well, another, person with story brain is Michael Bay, and you wrote a Kindle book, Michael effing Bay, The Unheralded Genius in Michael Bay's Films, which is very different from the teen drama genre.
It is, yeah. It's kind of a satire, and it's always funny to me when people don't realize it's a spoof. It was sort of born. There were a couple things that birthed that. One was the fourth Transformers was coming out, and I saw some people I follow on Twitter were like, "Oh God, this thing, these suck. They're too long. They're too violent. They're this, they're that. It's going to be an awful time. I got my opening night tickets." And I'm like, "There's a disconnect there. There's a real disconnect where you know what your review is going to be, and you're still like, gotta see it Thursday night." And so when I went to see it, I was like, what if I went and just as an exercise, pretended that I already had decided every choice this movie made was absolutely right. Like, rather than go in and say he's going to screw this up, decide that everything was brilliant and everything had a perfect reason and a deeper meaning for being there. What would that look like? And so I wrote a blog post about how Transformers Age of Extinction was actually a brilliant metaphor for the Iraq War. And I just went deep in like analyzing it to a depth that people, study like, Scorsese films or yeah,
Or Reddit threads today,
similar
but yeah.
stature. And I decided every choice he made is right. How am I going to, claim he's really saying something with this? We're not looking deep enough because,
Hmm.
it's like Hitchcock. You're watching a simple thriller, but it's so much deeper. And there were a couple of people who'd also done like really erudite film examinations online at the same time.
Hmm.
And so it was probably a little bit of a spoof on that, where I'm sort of
Yeah.
like, if you use enough words, you can make anything sound intelligent or local.
Amazing.
And so it was just going to be one blog post. And it ended up being one of my more successful blog posts. And much like with Crisis on Infinite Teen Dramas, I sort of like, what if I did something bigger there? And then I was like, well, let's look at Michael Bay's catalog. Could I do a whole book about this? Because at the time, I still had an itch to
Hmm.
write a book. And it was during a period where I was unemployed for 6 months. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And I was like, well, if I did one movie a week and I wrote a chapter of comparable
Hmm.
length for each of these, that's enough where I could do like a self-published book. It might be just kind of fun as a lark. It would be a complete departure from everything I've written. But sometimes you want to do something wacky and out there. And the trick with that was if you're writing a book about an author, it's easy enough to do a review of one movie and basically decide up is down, left is right.
Hmm.
Whatever the right thing should be, I'm going to make a case for the opposite. It's trickier when you're doing 11 reviews that are going in sequence
Hmm.
and you have to kind of stick to a theory of the game
Through line,
because
yeah.
you can't decide like, okay, if I'm doing a Bizarro review of this movie and I'm saying this, my Bizarro review of the next movie has to somehow match that theory. It's like when you read an examination of Hitchcock, they decide he's basically got a thesis that threads through his films or common themes or common beliefs that make themselves be known. So it was like, okay, how do I write the most, bizarre, unexpected review of Armageddon, but also make sure that what I say Michael Bay's heart is saying on Armageddon somehow matches or is speaking to what I say his heart is on Transformers. And so for the most part, that worked. There were a couple of those where I had to take a couple extra days and figure out like, oh shoot, I've written myself into a corner here because the Gonzo version of this is saying he loves this philosophy that for the other two movies I have to say he's tearing down.
Mm.
So how am I going to make this match, or what's my other take on it? But it was an exercise in like debate because I'd have to watch a film and I'd have to find out what is my devil's advocate version of this. And
Hmm.
every now and then you're like, well, if you read a Hitchcock, examination, they always hit one or two movies where they're like, okay, this isn't his best work. Whatever he was trying to do failed, and we're going to talk about why. So I knew I had that in my back pocket of like, if I ever hit one where I couldn't find a deeper meaning, I'd just be like, oh, this is the one that like this was a sellout movie. He must have done it for this reason because he's got nothing to say in this.
Yeah.
But you can't play that card too many times. But it was a fun thing, and then it was an exercise in every now and then I would attract the attention of audiences who didn't like some of my opinions about other movies. And
Mm.
they're, what does this guy know? He thinks Michael Bay is a genius. And I'm like, you didn't even read the
Yeah.
blurb about the book. Like it is deeply tongue in cheek. There's no point in the book or on the dust jacket or in the blurb where I say this is a satire. Like it's a thing where you're reading it and you sort of discover that, oh, this must be spoofing something.
Yeah.
And there were enough people who read it and got, oh, not only is this just like a spoof of like Michael Bay films, but it's like a spoof of film criticism as a genre.
Right.
Some people got to that extra level, but for the first couple of years when it was out there, I would maintain the straight face. No, this is serious stuff, guys. You didn't know Michael Bay was a feminist? I'm going to prove to you Michael Bay is a feminist right here.
Oh
He's
yeah.
not exploiting women. No, no, no. Okay, let's talk about the first Transformers here. Let's talk about Megan Fox. Megan
Yeah.
Fox's character, if you watch that film carefully, is the only capable human who's not in the military. You got Shia LaBeouf, who's tripping over his own 2 feet anytime a Transformer runs in the room. Megan Fox is the one there with a chainsaw who is slicing and dicing up the mini ones and saving his ass. She's the one who knows how to fix the car. She has gotten all the traditional masculine traits, so much
Mhm.
so that most people don't remember her name in that film. It is Michaela Baines. Michaela Baines. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Michael Bay? Oh, Megan Fox is Michael Bay's Mary Sue. She is
Yeah.
the true protagonist. And you're going to come at me with, wait, I've seen the movie. That scene where she's bent over the hood of the car and the camera's leering at her. What is going on?
The
Like,
outfits.
yes, yes, that does exist there. But you're forgetting something about that scene. That scene is Sam's point of view. For that moment, we are not the omniscient director, Michael Bay. Michael Bay is showing
Right.
us what Sam sees when he looks at this woman. He only sees the superficial. He's sexualizing her. It is the introduction. He only wants her for that. And it's in the later scenes that we realize that perception is wrong. He is tricking us. He is encouraging us to leer like a teenage boy and make the same judgments a teenage boy would. But if you go deep, you see he's doing that so that later we recognize our own sexism and realize, oh my gosh, how could I have objectified this woman who is the strongest female character in existence? See, that is the kind of argument you end up making in these things. And the only danger of it is when you do 3 or 4 of these in a row, they start to make sense.
You're like, yeah, that must have been what he was
It
thinking.
must have been what he wanted because you
Yeah.
go and you go, oh my
And
God, no,
nothing to
that
do with
actually,
any other reason.
yeah, because everything I've said there, none of that is made up. It is all interpretation. Like the fact that her name is essentially a riff on his own name.
Yeah.
If it was if there was a man in there called Mike Basin, we'd go, oh my God, this guy, he's just writing himself into the film there. It's funny how easy it is to make that argument. And yeah, we know that very likely those aren't the reasons. But yeah, you go deep enough into this and you start to wonder, maybe there is something to this.
Maybe it's smarter
Or
than we thought.
or what I was hoping to do with this is you do that and then you start wondering about every other film theory you have ever heard with someone speaking authoritatively about, well, Hitchcock chose this angle
Yeah.
because the shadows do this
But
and he
really
shot
just
this thing
bullshit.
here. And Kubrick was another one. Oh, I'd forgotten. There was a documentary about The Shining where people went so deep on every frame of The Shining and what it meant and all of this. And if you watch that documentary, there's a lot of what later gets kind of mocked in my Michael Bay book in that documentary on The Shining, because
Mhm.
people are, people find meaning everywhere. And it's kind of fun, but like when you go a little extreme with it, it's crazy. So part of that book was also, let me find the least likely auteur that you would think would have something deep to say, and let me treat it like he's Stanley Kubrick. Uh, and that's always a fun exercise. And I guess it kind of teaches you, like what you want to like. You can always find that. I could probably do something like that with any teen drama and commit to the bit on that, I'm sure.
I was just thinking it'd be funny to write a book from the perspective of Dawson Leary critiquing different directors' films. Like, what would he say about Michael Bay's films? And yeah.
We've
Well,
gotten a little bit of that along the way. I know that, like, I remember one line in particular during the 5th season of Dawson's
mm.
Creek where someone references, oh, this is Spielberg here. He's like, actually, I'm in kind of a Soderbergh phase right there. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm a walking cliche because that was exactly where I was at that point too. It's what I want the adult Dawson Leary looking back on his own films, because he would go, gosh, I really just have one story I'm retelling, three
Over
times
and over with
over and over. Which is the one thing I get why that was done for the series and for the nostalgia of the
the
fans. But that's
meta-ness.
one thing
Yeah.
where I feel like they did a little disservice to Dawson because I don't think he's meant to be the guy who only has one story. But okay, the first time he does it, it's you write what you know, and that's the most dramatic thing that happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
The second time he does it, it's because well, we're coming near the end of the series and we want to bring things full circle with the
Right.
pilot. And the third time is that movie he made became a
The
TV show. So
TV
like
show.
it's all justified. I can see it. I think by the third time I would have loved to have had him acknowledge like I've trapped myself on the show where I'm perpetually rewriting the same story again and I've got to
Yeah.
find my way out of it, which could have been an interesting thing for him in the finale, like realizing like, oh, I get to live life twice, but I've also kind of like, am I trapping myself in my own patterns here? Like how
Yeah.
do I break out of this? Probably too
Well,
heady for
we don't
that.
know. He created Creek Days, and we know that that was a hit in their universe. And who knows, he got that call from Spielberg, or he was going to speak with Spielberg. So who knows what he would
Yeah,
have been writing after that.
I figure he probably eventually ended up with a career maybe akin to Kevin Williamson because Kevin was always sort
Hmm.
of writing his own life there
Right.
and all of that. So he probably had some success. He probably wrote one or two things. I mean, Creek Days is going to be on his resume, but maybe he wrote a movie or two after that kind of set him up, and then 20 years later he's making a sequel to that and having an existential crisis about that, or saying, "Oh wow, I have something new to say with these characters that I haven't played with." And
Let's go back to them.
yeah,
Well, what's next for you?
I like everyone in Hollywood trying to figure that out right now. At least half the Writers Guild is out of work. There was a big contraction of shows, which we knew was coming before the strike. The strike maybe hastened it a little bit,
Yeah.
but there's about half as many writers working now as there were a few years ago. And so, yeah, I'm working on specs right now. I'm working on a feature spec and pitching a couple comic ideas to some editors, but nothing yet on the horizon at the moment, but
Well, I know you're still updating your blog on occasion.
very occasionally. I had kind of like, I would say for almost 10 years, kind of been tapering off. And then there'd always be something like every few months where I would go crazy and write like a
Yeah.
series of things. But yeah, especially since the show got started, I haven't updated it all that much. Every now and then with like stuff from the show or
Mhm.
yeah, if I've got a podcast appearance, usually I'll mention it there. But yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing what comes of your specs and wherever this crazy, crazy career in TV takes you.
That's it. It's a weird time to be a TV writer, but
Yeah.
hopefully we'll keep making TV. And as I said, teen dramas are perennial. I hope to end up on one before I'm way too old to be writing them. That's I'm probably pushing it now, but we'll see.
I don't think so. No. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad
Oh,
we got to talk.
yeah, this was fun. Thank you for having me.